In this video, I'd like to talk about how to know yourself. So how can I be myself? Well, you know yourself when you're not yourself. You know what's right from what is not from knowing what is wrong. You know how to do good when you know what is good and evil. And so evil is the absence of light, the absence of God, spirit and presence working in you. And so God exposes the darkness, brings things that are in the dark or hidden to the light, so then they may be healed, where they can be restored or salvaged or saved. Here's a quote of Kierkegaard I'd like to talk about. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. Let me repeat that. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. Now, I want to summarize a lot of the stuff I've been talking about, the differences between my approach to psychology or typology, if you like, and how it's different from MBTI and other systems of typing, personality typing. So, the first thing I look for are triggers. What are your triggers? When are you not yourself? Well, when you are in despair. When you feel despair is a form of not being who you are. When I first started reading Kierkegaard, I was just a teenager, and it was the story of his life that appealed to me because, in some ways, it reminded me of my upbringing. My father wanted me to be a preacher, like himself. He insisted that I practice and do things the way he said I should, and yet I found myself resisting, and I didn't even know why, but I just didn't feel I was myself or being authentic just by following his example or footsteps. In fact, he used to tell me, do what I say, don't do what I do. And so there was things that were contradicting attributes about my father that turned me off from wanting to follow him in the study and the ministry. Kierkegaard had a similar experience. He had a father who was a minister, and he wanted him to be a minister like himself. And then even worse, in his time, you would be betrothed to someone. Your life would literally be sort of, including your community, sort of would plan your life for you, and then you simply fell in line and just did whatever you were expected to do. And so he was expected to become a minister and to marry Regina, which was his family arranged marriage bride. He was expected to marry. Who he was expected to marry was even dictated to him. And so Kierkegaard, had a controlling father. I had a very controlling father and mother in certain ways. Well, in a lot of ways, I must say. But the thing was, I was always angry. I was always despairing. And there's always these emotions of fear and guilt. I felt guilty because I didn't do as my father lived up to my parents' expectations. And I felt shamed because I was not really fulfilling the family's expectations of who I should be and according to them, who I was. And so Kierkegaard had a similar experience. He saw his father one day cursing God, getting very mad, behaving very erratically. My father was like that. He would come home, get angry, put holes in the walls with his fists, and behaved anything except like the servant of God that he portrayed himself to be. And my mother was the same way, not very empathetic to me and my needs, just expected me to fall in line and do whatever I was told. And so I started to think of God as, okay, my father and my mother, and what was God really guiding me, or what was God's real purpose for me? So I immediately started to identify that purpose, whatever God's purpose, will is, with my true identity, what God's the identity that I have, the personality I have. God must have given it to me for a reason. Now, many years later, I studied typology, MBTI, and other personality typing systems. I learned Kierkegaard was an INFJ. I'm an INFJ personality type, and there's certain natural antipathy between people that are intuitively inclined and people that are sensory inclined, and vice versa. So there were traits or characteristics that my parents simply didn't approve of, but they were traits that was natural to me, just to question everything and I didn't have the same um, direction, you know, in myself. I felt I wanted to explore the world and not to be of the world, but to really come to a higher understanding of God and what God's purpose was for not only myself but for humanity. This came, to the forefront one time when I was talking to my father, and my father was scolding me, saying, "You can't change the world." And I was like 5 years old. I don't know what made him think that I wanted to change the world, but he started to lecture me about you can't change the world. And the more he insisted that I could not change the world, the more appealed to me, and the more I was enthralled by wanting to change the world, then sort of became a more of a appealing purpose to me than just fitting in, and as he would say, being a cog in the wheel. This expressed itself one day when I wanted a bicycle, and I was I don't know 6 years old, and he bought me this Sears and Roebuck red bicycle, beautiful bicycle. It was one of my main biggest birthdays. And then he showed me the wheel of the bike and how each wheel has a spoke. And he was trying to encourage me. My father was an immigrant here to the U.S., and he was telling me when he came here he had nothing, but that if I worked hard, I could be a spoke in the wheel. That there was a place for everybody here. There's a role for everyone to have, and just be a spoke in the wheel. He literally said that to me, and I was appalled. That's the last thing that appealed to me was fitting in and just being a spoke in the wheel. And just that's the very last thing I wanted to be. So Kierkegaard, in a similar way, rejected his calling as his parents saw it, as his father saw it, and he did not marry Regina, his girlfriend that he was supposed to marry, and all this stuff. And suddenly Kierkegaard found himself in living and leading an entirely different life outside of the traditions that he was expected to follow. And I found that myself in the same, in a different way, but in the same way, I found myself interested in teaching music and being inspired with music and wanting to express myself through teaching and through sharing my love for music with other people. And that is still what I am doing today. But I didn't understand why I felt drawn this way, except that I was constantly called upon to sing and to do things with music, as my father was a preacher or evangelist, and he would go from church to church, and he even had his own orchestra that was headed by my college teacher. And so there was always something that was to serve God, but somehow it always music came up. But then my interest in music was never, my father didn't think I should play jazz or rock and roll or any of that stuff. But I felt you should explore music and learn how yourself about yourself through music, and that's really the whole point of music is to know about who you are and learn how to deal with these triggers. I call them fear, anger, these negative emotions that don't where you cannot be yourself. And when you can't be yourself, then you find yourself not being drawn, unable to be drawn to God. And I found only as I learned to be myself that I found myself drawn more and more to God and felt closer to God in how I lived my life. We'll talk more about that later.